ado, if you could please remember to keep your microphones on mute until asked to unmute, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, I'll hand it on over to Ashley Welch and Ruby. Thank you both so much.
Thanks, Krista.
Thank you, Krista. I'm going to share my screen, and Ruby's going to start us off. Oh, Ruby, you are on mute.
All right, that would be the first thing to do. Thanks. Great to be here. And our hope is in this first module, the second module, that we will kind of outline what our conversation is going to be about these next couple of days, and what our hope is in our training times together over the next couple of years. So next slide, please. So Ashley Welch and I thought it would be great to just take a step back and frame where our 6 core commitments began, or the context for that. And we will talk in this space and in other spaces what the Recovery Cafe model looks like, and the 3 major commitments that members make, because that's the core of what our community life looks like. And it's a place where we live out our guiding principles that Ashley Green spoke about in the previous module. And in this space, Ashley Welch is going to now jump in and help us think through and walk through the 6 core commitments that we as cafes make to be a part of the network, to be implementing the Recovery Cafe model. So that's kind of the frame of what our agenda is for today. And turn it over to you, Ashley Welch, for learning targets.
Thanks, Ruby. So we have 3 learning targets today, and as we progress through these concepts, I invite you to reflect on how your core team can use our core commitments to ensure fidelity to the Recovery Cafe model. Then we'll review some of the evidence-based concepts that support these core commitments. And in your virtual packet, you do have a syllabus that has all of these learning targets listed. So I encourage you throughout the next 2 days and beyond to look to those to ensure that you are getting what you need out of these modules, and ask questions if you feel like you aren't getting what you need to meet these targets. So definitely want y'all to get the most out of these. And so please put your questions in the chat and ask the questions, or bring up the thoughts that are coming to you as you reflect on our different pieces of the model. So first we'll talk about how the core commitments support the model before we talk about where they're implemented. And so each core commitment is a statement that your organization agreed to implement in your MOU as a member cafe of the Recovery Cafe network. So Ruby will review the specifics of these in a moment, but we have basically nicknames to give shorthand to these longer commitments, so that we can be able to quickly remind ourselves of the essence that they hold. So for core commitment 1, which we will refer to as a healing community space, that's creating a community space that is drug and alcohol free, embracing and healing. Our second is loving accountability, which is the concept in which we nurture structures of that loving accountability called recovery circles. Contribution empowers every member to be a contributor. For core commitment number 4, we'll be raising up member leaders. For core commitment 5, we ensure responsible stewardship across the model and our cafes. And then for core commitment 6, we work to end systemic racism and socioeconomic inequality so every person can thrive. And so on a high level, the core commitments are a tool that help the network, your community, and yourselves know what to expect in any given cafe. So while there is flexibility to enable your cafe to meet your community's needs, these provide a structure of loving accountability and responsible stewardship that you and the network can look to ensure fidelity to the model. And the network team will use these commitments to frame our training and guide your implementation of the model. So each commitment has bullet points similar to action steps that instruct how to implement that commitment. And we'll also use these core commitments to help evaluate your progress in implementing the model and ensure readiness for emerging cafe evaluation, which happens farther down this journey, but is something that we'll be looking towards. And so I'm going to pass it to Ruby to talk about how we implement these core commitments.
Thanks, Ashley. So that's the frame for what's coming next. When we think about the first core commitment of the healing milieu, next slide, please.
Mhm.
Thanks. Is to think about what our work is about is pulling together all these different aspects of what makes a space welcoming and inviting. Oh, I'm on the wrong slide. Move to that one. Ashley, would you go back to the previous slide? Thanks. That the Recovery Cafe model really is about a membership structure that will we'll talk about what that means at the individual level. This is about all the aspects that you are working on or will work on to bring together what it means to create space to hold the model that includes recovery circles, meal times, volunteers, opportunities to give back. All of these little circles are pieces of that welcoming space that we're trying to build together. Next slide. So what are the components of what healing space looks like to us and what the core commitment means? Is that it's drug and alcohol free. We'll have time to talk in our trainings what that looks like, how we hold that, how we have conversations around being drug and alcohol free for 24 hours before coming into the space and within the space itself. Ashley Green really spoke a moment ago about radical hospitality and what that looks like. Acknowledgement that we're all in recovery from something, that we're not, we're all on a journey, and that safety and reconciliation is something all of us need. So those are just some major strokes, what a healing community space could look like and needs to look like. Next slide, please. So pulling out loving accountability, what are the structures for that? This is core commitment 2, I believe. Yep. If we're going to have someone to hold someone lovingly accountable, it's loving on our part to first communicate what exactly it is we mean by membership. How are we going to hold each other accountable? And that's communicating what it means to be a member of the cafe. So that happens in new member introduction, where you greet guests and explain your program. It happens at the front door. We have conversations about how's it going with being accountable. And the recovery circle itself is a structure around which people are agreeing to come once a week, share their story, show up for each other. And before COVID, we were had a membership of maybe a 200 or 300. And so it's impossible for one person to know every person, but with circles, it's possible for every person to be known deeply by at least one other, or by at least several others. And that's the hope of the recovery circles. So your responsibility is to establish those and to find a way to hold members accountable. Next slide, please. Contribution. You know, if we're a community living in a space together, the idea is not that we are the people with having it all together and able to create space where you get served. It really is about we're working on recovery together. This is our shared community. And so naturally that means that we want people to see ownership and give back, contribute to build this community so that still others might be welcomed into our space. So what that means for you as the implementer, as we walk through building a new cafe in your space, is creating space where people can give back, creating opportunities to contribute to the larger. And people are diverse in their skill sets and their giftedness. So making sure that in your space, you're thinking about how can we make giving back possible for every person, whatever their skill set. Is it dishwashing? Is it cooking? Is it sweeping? Is it volunteering to be a welcomer? Just being really creative about how people might give back to your community. The School for Recovery is a place where we take time to invite members to think about what are my gifts, discover what gives me joy, how might I want to give back to the community out of that place of joy. The notion of giving of your best self cuts across the entire community for core staff, core team, volunteers, members. And so we create space for each of those kinds of groups to reflect, to share their experience, and then as a result, find how they would want to joyfully give back to the community. And the healing milieu, again, is the community space just where people come together to embody those gifts. So we'll talk more about building that space. Member leaders, another major, one of the core commitments. Once you're up and running, you've got a core team, you've built your staff, and you've invited members into your space who are contributing or giving back of their best selves. You're holding them accountable to show up for their circles. You're beginning to see gifts emerge among your membership. And out of that, you will, I'm sure, begin to notice that there are leadership qualities among your membership. So that next phase, after you've got a membership built, you will see leadership grow among your members. And then our commitment is to continue to raise them up so they can continue to deepen and develop how they give back in your community and in the larger world externally. So on this slide, we just highlight what that looks like, and we'll talk about it in one of our post-launch trainings, is that it's a process. Recognizing gifts, having people recognize it in themselves, having others affirm them, and finding a way to express them. You start in the milieu by just affirming that all gifts are welcome so that people feel safe to say, I think my gift is watercoloring. How could I fit in here? But a community of safety and a space where we can express what we think our gifts are opens the door to how we give back and become leaders in that particular domain. And then the last one is it will require additional support. So just calling out to keep this commitment means that we won't always be super efficient. We won't get there the short way. It might take a really long time, and it will require extra investment of time, patience, resources to help people feel safe enough to discover their gifts and then express them as leaders in your space. Again, we'll have time to talk more deeply about that as we grow. Next one. Oh, I think Ashley, this is yours.
Yes. Thanks, Ruby. So our fifth core commitment is ensuring responsible stewardship. And whenever we talk about this, people are like, what do you mean by that? Which is a really great question. So I looked up the definition a few weeks ago to try and figure out a comprehensive way that allows people to understand what this means. And so stewardship is the idea that we're all loyal to and responsible for the management and resources entrusted to us. So whether that be data, money, liability, or relationships that we hold, as the core team, your core team members, you're responsible to protect the integrity of your cafe community and the Recovery Cafe model. And so sometimes this is at the expense of the individual because we have to ensure that the community can thrive. But while we have specifics listed here, this concept is threaded throughout every area of the model and the structures that support it. And that has to be considered in every area of decision making. So we gave y'all 3 action steps to be able to implement this, but noting that, when we ensure integrity in all aspects of responsible stewardship, it goes beyond these 3 things and the things that are listed. specifically, it's threaded into everything that we do. And every time we support a member, having responsible stewardship in mind, so that while we hold them lovingly accountable to their agreements, we're holding ourselves lovingly accountable to the responsibility of holding that community. So the core team and staff are the primary people that have to ensure that integrity. And then the second aspect that we talk about a lot, and that Rachel Marin, our monitoring and evaluation manager, will speak to a little bit more tomorrow, is actively participating in the RCN's monitoring and evaluation efforts. That mainly happens via the platform called Agency, which is the direct service database that you'll use every day when you're supporting members in your space. And then the third piece to that is establishing partnerships that build recovery capital in the larger community. So being able to create more avenues for recovery by partnering with partners that are of like mind, and that are trying to support your members in the best way possible. And then our sixth core commitment focuses on addressing systemic racism and other forms of inequality. So while radical social justice work has always been embedded in the Recovery Cafe model, the network came together in 2020 to confront the need for intentional and explicit anti-racist efforts to make our communities healing for everyone. And we expect all our cafes to plan, develop, and evolve in a way that confronts and changes the cultures that have othered so many of us in the recovery community. And so one aspect of this is the network commitment coffee hours. Our DEI committee created this network-wide space to learn from and grow with each other, to discuss topics like deaf and Spanish-speaking support, LGBTQ inclusivity. Those are just recent topics. But you'll see here, there's a lot of different ways in which you can establish a plan and programming to meet people where they're at in a way that is just and equitable. And so in addition to these 5 action steps, the DEI committee did come up with some suggested ways that you could implement these, because this is hard work and we learn best by learning with each other and growing with each other. So we want to make this effort together as a network. I know we just went through a lot of things, and before Ruby moves into the evidence-based concepts that support the model, want to open it up for any questions or anything that people have on their mind. And I can't see hands or the chat, so feel free to come off mute and speak up. Alrighty.
No questions in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Julia. I'm gonna pass it back to Ruby then to talk about